The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as Jake Martinez pulled his worn boots on for another day of backbreaking work. At 28, his hands were already weathered like leather from years of mending fences, feeding cattle, and doing whatever needed doing around the Riverside Ranch. The other ranch hands barely acknowledged him as he walked past their bunkhouse toward the main barn. "There goes Martinez again," whispered Tommy, one of the younger workers, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Acting like he owns the place when he's nothing but hired help like the rest of us." Jake pretended not to hear, though the words stung more than he cared to admit. He'd been working at Riverside Ranch for 8 years, ever since he'd aged out of the foster care system with nothing but the clothes on his back and a fierce determination to make something of himself. While other hands came and went, treating their jobs as temporary stops, Jake had thrown himself into every task with the dedication of someone who truly cared about the land and the animals. The ranch owner, Mr. Henderson, was a fair but distant man who spent most of his time in the city managing his other business interests. He left the day-to-day operations to his foreman, Bill Crawford, a gruff man in his 50s who had little patience for what he called dreamer types. Crawford saw Jake's suggestions for improvements as overstepping, his extra hours as showing off, and his genuine care for the livestock as unnecessary sentiment. "Martinez!" Crawford's voice boomed across the yard that Tuesday morning. "Get over here and help load these cattle. And make it quick, we're already behind schedule." Jake jogged over to the loading pen where a dozen steers waited to be transported to market. As he worked alongside the other hands, he noticed something troubling. Several of the animals showed signs of stress and poor health that hadn't been there the week before. Their coats were dull, their eyes lacked brightness, and a few were favoring their legs as if in pain. "Mr. Crawford," Jake said during a brief break, "I think we should have the vet take a look at some of these steers before we ship them out. That big one there has been limping, and a couple others don't look right." Crawford barely glanced at the animals. "They look fine to me." "We've got contracts to fulfill, Martinez. Not time to baby every cow that's having a slow morning." "Load 'em up." Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept working. This wasn't the first time his concerns had been dismissed. Over the years, he'd watched Crawford make decision after decision that prioritized quick profits over the long-term health of the ranch. Sick animals were shipped out anyway. Proper veterinary care was delayed to save money. Equipment repairs were done with cheap fixes that never lasted. The worst part was watching how the other workers were treated. Crawford paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, despite the dangerous nature of ranch work. When Luis Hernandez broke his arm in a fall from a horse 3 months earlier, he'd been fired rather than given time to heal. When Sarah Shen, one of the few female ranch hands, complained about unsafe working conditions in the hayloft, Crawford had reduced her hours until she was forced to find other work that evening. As Jake sat on the steps of his small trailer at the edge of the ranch property, he pulled out the notebook he'd been keeping for the past 2 years. Page after page contained his observations and ideas for improving ranch operations. Better feeding schedules that would increase cattle health and weight gain. Rotation systems for grazing that would preserve the grassland. Safety protocols that would protect workers from injury. He'd also been quietly researching something else entirely: land prices in the area and the requirements for starting his own ranch operation. It seemed like an impossible dream for someone with his background and limited savings. But Jake had learned long ago that impossible dreams were sometimes the only ones worth chasing. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Maria Santos, the ranch cook, emerged from the main house carrying a plate of food. "You missed dinner again," she said, settling beside him on the steps. Maria was in her early 40s, a widow who'd been working at the ranch for 6 years. She was one of the few people who treated Jake with genuine kindness. "Thanks, Maria, I wasn't really hungry." Jake accepted the plate gratefully, though his stomach had been growling for an hour. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Mio. All that extra work you do, staying late to check on the animals, Crawford doesn't even notice." "Maybe not," Jake said, taking a bite of Maria's excellent beef stew. "But I notice. And someday maybe it'll matter." Maria studied his face in the fading light. You're planning something, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. That same look you had when you first arrived here as that skinny kid who'd never been on a ranch before. Jake smiled slightly. Maria had been the first person to show him any kindness when he'd arrived at Riverside Ranch, desperate for work and a place to belong. She'd taught him which end of a cow to approach, how to properly clean and maintain equipment, and most importantly, that hard work and integrity mattered more than where you came from. I've been thinking, Jake said carefully, about what it would take to run a place the right way, where animals are treated properly, where workers are paid fairly and have safe conditions, where someone's background doesn't matter as much as their character. That's a beautiful dream, Jake, but dreams don't pay the bills. Before Jake could respond, the sound of shouting erupted from the main barn. Both he and Maria jumped to their feet as they saw Crawford storming across the yard, his face red with anger. Behind him, two of the ranch hands were trying to calm a spooked horse that was rearing and pawing at the air. What happened? Jake called out as he ran toward the commotion. That new kid, Rodriguez, left the gate open on Thunder's stall, Crawford snarled. Horse got out and spooked the whole string. Could have been killed, and all because some fool can't follow simple instructions. Jake looked toward the barn and saw Miguel Rodriguez, barely 18 years old, standing with his shoulders slumped in defeat. Miguel had only been working at the ranch for 2 weeks, eager to learn but still making the kinds of mistakes that came with inexperience. Mr. Crawford, Jake said, Miguel's still learning. Maybe if someone took the time to properly train. I don't pay people to learn on my time, Martinez. Rodriguez is fired. I want him off the property within the hour. Jake watched as Crawford stormed away, leaving Miguel standing alone with tears in his eyes. The young man had mentioned that this job was his family's only source of income, while his father recovered from a construction accident. Without this work, Miguel's family would lose their small apartment in town. That night, as Jake lay awake in his narrow bunk, he thought about all the Miguel Rodriguezes he'd seen come and go over the years. Good people who needed a chance, who were willing to work hard if someone just believed in them enough to provide proper training and support. He thought about Maria, whose skills as a cook were vastly undervalued and underpaid. He thought about the animals under his care who deserved better than the minimum effort required to keep them alive until market day. Most of all, he thought about the notebook hidden under his mattress, filled with plans and dreams that seemed more urgent with each passing day. Somewhere out there was a piece of land waiting for someone who understood that success meant more than just profit margins. It meant creating a place where both animals and people could thrive. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Mr. Henderson's expensive car pulled up to the main house just after sunrise, which was unusual since he rarely visited during the week. Jake was repairing a section of fence near the house when he overheard heated voices carrying through the open windows. I don't care what the margins look like. Bill, Henderson's voice was sharp with frustration. The Department of Agriculture inspector found violations that could shut us down. Sick animals being shipped, safety violations, worker complaints. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Crawford's voice was defensive. Those inspectors don't understand the realities of ranch work. We're meeting our contracts and turning a profit. Isn't that what matters? Not when it puts my entire operation at risk. I'm getting calls from buyers questioning the quality of our cattle. Insurance companies are asking pointed questions about worker safety. This can't continue. Jake strained to hear more, but the voices moved deeper into the house. An hour later, Henderson emerged and walked directly to where Jake was working. Martinez, isn't it? Henderson's tone was businesslike but not unfriendly. How long have you been working here? 8 years, sir. And in your opinion, what would it take to turn this operation around? To address the issues that have been raised? Jake straightened up, sensing this might be the most important conversation of his life. Well, sir, it would start with proper animal care. Regular veterinary checkups, better nutrition programs, humane handling practices. Then you'd need to invest in worker safety and fair wages. People work harder when they feel valued. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. Those things cost money up front. Yes, sir, but they save money in the long run. Healthier animals bring better prices. Experienced workers make fewer costly mistakes. And proper maintenance prevents expensive equipment failures down the road. You've given this considerable thought. Jake took a deep breath. I have, sir. 3 weeks after Henderson's unexpected visit, the changes at Riverside Ranch began in earnest. Crawford was nowhere to be seen when Jake arrived for work that Monday morning. Instead, Henderson himself stood in the main yard with a clipboard and a determined expression. Martinez, Henderson called out as Jake approached. I need to speak with you privately. They walked to Henderson's office in the main house, a room Jake had never entered before. The walls were lined with awards and photographs showing Henderson with various business associates and politicians. But what caught Jake's attention was a large map of the local area spread across the desk, marked with red circles and handwritten notes. I've been doing some investigating since our last conversation, Henderson said, settling behind his desk. Talking to veterinarians, agricultural experts, even some of my competitors. Do you know what I found? Jake shook his head, though his pulse was quickening. Every single person I spoke to mentioned the same thing. They said if I wanted to see how a ranch should really be run, I should watch what Jake Martinez does when he thinks nobody's looking. Henderson leaned forward. Apparently you've been quietly implementing better practices for years, working extra hours to ensure animal welfare, and treating your coworkers with respect that my former foreman never showed. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd always assumed his efforts went unnoticed, that his reputation extended no further than the ranch boundaries. Dr. Patricia Alvarez at the County Veterinary Clinic told me something particularly interesting, Henderson continued. She said you've been calling her after hours, on your own dime, whenever you had concerns about sick animals. You've been getting advice and following up with treatments that Crawford never authorized or paid for. Jake's cheeks reddened. The animals needed care, sir. I couldn't just watch them suffer. Which brings me to why you're here. Henderson stood and walked to the map. I'm shutting down operations at this location. The violations and bad practices have made it impossible to continue profitably. But I have another property about 50 miles north minus 2,800 acres that's been sitting unused for 2 years. He pointed to one of the red circles on the map. I want to start fresh there. New facilities, new practices, new management structure, and I want you to run it. Jake felt the floor shift beneath him. Sir, I'm offering you the position of ranch manager, Martinez. Full authority over operations, hiring, and day-to-day management. The only condition is that you implement the kind of operation you've always believed this place could be. The offer was so far beyond anything Jake had dared to hope for that he struggled to find words. Mr. Henderson, I'm honored, but I don't have formal education in ranch management. No business degree, no, what you have is better than any degree. You have integrity, practical knowledge, and most importantly, you understand that treating animals and people right isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Henderson returned to his chair. The salary would be $75,000 annually, plus a percentage of profits above certain benchmarks. Health benefits, housing allowance, and a budget for hiring and equipment purchases. Jake's mind reeled. It was more money than he'd ever imagined earning, but more than that, it was the chance to prove that his way of thinking could actually work. There's something else, Henderson said. I know you've been concerned about the other workers here. Maria Santos, for instance, I understand she's been grossly underpaid for someone with her skills. And there are others who've been let go unfairly by Crawford. Yes, sir. Good people who just needed a real chance. Well, you'll have the authority to hire whoever you think can contribute to the success of the operation. I'm not interested in someone's resume as much as their character and work ethic. That afternoon, Jake found himself driving Henderson's truck to the new property, his hands still shaking slightly from the morning's revelation. The land spread out before him in rolling hills covered with native grasses, perfect for cattle grazing. A creek wound through the property, providing natural water sources. Near the center stood an old farmhouse that would need renovation, along with several outbuildings in various states of repair, but Jake didn't see the work that needed to be done. He saw the potential. Pastures divided into proper rotation systems. New barns built with both animal welfare and worker safety in mind. Clean, comfortable housing for employees who would be treated as valuable team members rather than disposable labor. His first stop after returning from the property tour was Maria's small apartment in town. She answered the door with flour-covered hands and a questioning expression. "Jake? What are you doing here? Is everything all right?" "Maria, how would you feel about running the kitchen for a whole new ranch operation? Full-time position, competitive salary, benefits, and complete authority over meal planning and food purchasing." Maria stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. "Mio, what are you talking about? Did you hit your head on something today?" Jake explained everything: Henderson's offer, the new property, the chance to build something from the ground up. As he spoke, Maria's expression shifted from confusion to amazement to something that looked like hope. "You're serious?" she said finally. "You're really serious." "I am. And I need people I can trust. People who understand that we're not just building a business, we're building a community." Maria was quiet for a long time, staring out her window toward the distant mountains. "My grandmother used to tell me that sometimes God puts opportunities in your path that seem too good to be true. She said the trick was learning to recognize them and have the courage to say yes. Is that a yes?" Maria smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Jake had seen on her face in months. "That's a yes." Over the next week, Jake found himself in the unusual position of recruiting his own team. His first stop was Miguel Rodriguez, who'd been working construction since being fired from Riverside Ranch. Jake found him laying concrete for a new shopping center, his young face already marked by exhaustion and disappointment. "Miguel," Jake called out during the lunch break, "I have a proposition for you." Miguel looked up warily. Getting fired from the ranch had been humiliating, and Jake could see that the experience had shaken his confidence. "I'm starting up a new ranch operation, and I need someone young and eager to learn. Someone who's not afraid of hard work and who's willing to be trained properly. The pay would be $15 an hour to start, with raises based on performance and additional responsibilities." Miguel's eyes widened. His current construction job paid minimum wage with no benefits and no future prospects. "But I messed up at the last place," Miguel said quietly. "Made mistakes that could have gotten someone hurt." "We all make mistakes when we're learning," Jake replied. "The difference is whether someone takes the time to teach you how to do things right. I'm offering to teach you not just how to be a ranch hand, but how to understand animal behavior, land management, equipment maintenance, skills that could lead to supervisory positions down the road." By the end of the conversation, Jake had his second team member. His next visit was to Sarah Chun, who'd been working part-time at 3 different jobs since leaving Riverside Ranch. He found her at the local farm supply store, where she worked evenings stocking shelves and helping customers with their purchases. "Sarah," Jake approached her during a brief break, "I remember you had some good ideas about improving hay storage and barn ventilation when you worked at Riverside." Sarah looked up from the clipboard she'd been checking. "A lot of good those ideas did me." Crawford made it clear he wasn't interested in suggestions from women, especially ones that might cost money up front. "Well, I'm very interested in those ideas. In fact, I'd like to hire you as my assistant manager with specific responsibilities for facility planning and safety oversight." Sarah set down her clipboard entirely. "Come again?" Jake explained the new venture, emphasizing his commitment to creating a workplace where everyone's contributions were valued and where safety was a top priority rather than an afterthought. The position would pay $18 an hour initially, with a promotion to full manager level if things go as planned. You'd have real authority to implement safety protocols and facility improvements. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Jake, you know I appreciate the offer, but I've heard promises before. How do I know this won't just be more of the same?" Jake pulled out his notebook and opened it to a page filled with detailed sketches and notes. Because I've been planning this for 2 years. Every observation, every improvement idea, every lesson learned from watching how not to run a ranch. This isn't some impulsive decision, it's a carefully thought out plan to prove that treating people and animals right is the most effective way to run an operation. Sarah studied the notebook pages, her expression growing more interested with each detail. You really have been thinking about this. I have, and I need people who share that vision. People who understand that we're not just trying to make money, we're trying to change how this industry operates. That evening, Jake sat in his trailer surrounded by lists and plans. In 2 weeks, he would take possession of the new property and begin the most important work of his life. He had a core team of people he trusted, a supportive owner who was willing to invest in doing things right, and 18 months later, Jake stood on the porch of the newly renovated farmhouse, watching the sun rise over what had become known throughout the county as Haven Ranch. The name had come. Naturally, it truly was a haven for both the animals and the 43 people who now called it their workplace and, in many cases, their home. The transformation had been remarkable, but not without its challenges. Those first few months had tested every bit of Jake's resolve and leadership skills. Equipment broke down, weather didn't cooperate, and there were moments when even his most loyal supporters questioned whether his idealistic vision could survive the harsh realities of ranch economics. The breakthrough had come during their first cattle auction 6 months after opening. Jake had insisted on implementing a comprehensive health and nutrition program that cost significantly more than traditional feeding methods. Many neighboring ranchers had predicted that Haven Ranch would price itself out of the market within a year. Instead, their cattle brought premium prices that were 30% higher than the regional average. Buyers recognized the superior quality immediately. The animals were healthier, calmer, and had better weight distribution than cattle raised using conventional methods. Word spread quickly through the agricultural community that Haven Ranch was producing livestock that consistently exceeded market expectations. "Morning, boss," called out Teresa Williams, Haven Ranch's new veterinary technician, as she approached the farmhouse. Teresa had been working at a large-scale factory farm before Jake recruited her with the promise that she could implement the kind of comprehensive animal care program that most operations considered too expensive. "Morning, Teresa. How are our new arrivals settling in?" "Better than expected. The stress indicators are lower than anything I've seen before. That gradual introduction system you designed is working beautifully." Jake smiled. The arrival protocols he developed were based on years of observing how traumatized animals behaved when they were simply dumped into new environments without proper acclimatization. At Haven Ranch, new cattle were introduced gradually, given time to adjust, and monitored closely for signs of distress. "And how's your mother doing?" Jake asked. Teresa's mother had moved to the ranch 6 months earlier when her health began failing. Haven Ranch had become the first operation in the area to offer elder care support as an employee benefit. "Much better. Having her close by has made all the difference. I can't tell you how much it means to be able to check on her during my lunch break instead of worrying about her all day." Teresa's situation was exactly the kind of thing that made Jake proudest of what they'd built. Traditional ranch operations treated employees as interchangeable parts, expecting them to sacrifice their personal lives for the job. Haven Ranch operated on the principle that supporting employees' whole lives made them more committed and effective workers. As Teresa headed toward the veterinary clinic they'd built near the main barn, Jake's radio crackled to life. "Jake, this is Carlos. We've got visitors at the front gate." 3 men in suits with a Department of Agriculture vehicle. Jake's stomach tightened. Surprise inspections were always nerve-wracking, even when you knew we're following regulations. "I'll be right there." He found the 3 officials standing near the main barn with Carlos Mendoza, Haven Ranch's head of security and facilities. Carlos had been working construction when Jake recruited him, drawn by his military background and his reputation for meticulous attention to detail. "Gentlemen, Jake approached with his hand extended. "I'm Jake Martinez, ranch manager. How can I help you today?" The lead inspector, a stern-faced man in his 50s, shook Jake's hand briefly. "Agent Robert Harrison, USDA. We're here for a routine inspection. But I have to tell you, Mr. Martinez, we've been hearing some unusual reports about this operation." Jake's pulse quickened. "What kind of reports?" "Reports that you're somehow managing to exceed industry standards in every measurable category, while also paying above market wages and providing benefits that most agricultural operations consider financially impossible." Jake relaxed slightly. "Those reports are accurate, sir." Agent Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Which is exactly what we're here to verify. In my 23 years of doing this job, I've learned to be suspicious when something sounds too good to be true." The inspection took 4 hours and covered every aspect of the ranch operation. The officials examined animal health records, facility maintenance logs, employee safety protocols, environmental impact measures, and financial documentation. They interviewed workers randomly, asking detailed questions about working conditions, training procedures, and management practices. Jake accompanied them throughout, answering questions and providing documentation, but he also watched their expressions carefully. Agent Harrison's stern demeanor gradually gave way to something that looked like amazement. "Mr. Martinez," Harrison said as they completed their tour of the employee housing area, "I have to ask, how are you managing to provide this level of worker benefits while maintaining profitable operations?" "Most ranches cut every corner they can find." "Because cutting corners is actually more expensive in the long run," Jake replied. "When people feel valued and secure, they work harder and make fewer mistakes. When animals receive proper care, they're healthier and bring better prices. When equipment is maintained properly, it lasts longer and breaks down less often." "But the upfront costs are significant," Jake admitted. But Mr. Henderson understood that we were building for long-term success, not short-term profits. "Every dollar we spend on employee benefits comes back to us in the form of lower turnover, higher productivity, and better quality output." Agent Harrison made notes in his file, then looked around at the immaculate facilities. "What about pushback from other operations in the area?" "I imagine some of your competitors aren't thrilled about the precedent you're setting." Jake's expression darkened slightly. The opposition had been more intense than he'd anticipated. Several neighboring ranches had attempted to poach his workers with promises of immediate higher pay, though without the benefits and job security that made Haven Ranch attractive. There had also been attempts to spread rumors about the ranch's financial stability, and anonymous complaints filed with various regulatory agencies. "There's been some resistance," Jake said carefully. "But we focus on our own operation and let our results speak for themselves." "Well, your results are certainly impressive," Harrison said, closing his inspection notebook. "I'll be filing a report recommending Haven Ranch as a model operation for sustainable agricultural practices. You should expect a visit from some university researchers who are studying innovative ranch management techniques." After the inspectors left, Jake gathered his core team in the conference room they'd built above the main office. Maria, Miguel, Sarah, Teresa, Carlos, and 6 others who had become supervisors in various areas of the operation. "The inspection went well," Jake announced. "But more importantly, I got some news yesterday that I wanted to share with all of you." He pulled out a letter from his desk drawer. "This is from the National Agricultural Association. Haven Ranch has been selected as the recipient of this year's Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture Award. The ceremony is next month in Denver, and they're flying our entire management team out for the event." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, while Miguel sat back in his chair with a huge grin. "There's more," Jake continued. "Henderson just called me this morning. Based on our success here, he's purchasing 2 more properties and wants us to develop a model that can be replicated at other locations. We'll be hiring regional managers and developing training programs to teach our methods to other operations." Maria raised her hand. "Does this mean we'll be expanding the team here as well?" "Significantly. We're looking at adding another 15 to 20 positions over the next year, including specialized roles in animal therapy, sustainable agriculture research, and employee development. Carlos leaned forward. What about the housing situation? We're already at capacity. Henderson has approved construction of a new residential complex with family-friendly apartments and recreational facilities. We're also planning to build a school for employees' children so families don't have to worry about educational continuity. As the meeting continued, Jake found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. 18 months ago, he'd been dismissed as nothing but a ranch hand with unrealistic ideas about how agricultural operations should be run. Now, Haven Ranch was being studied by researchers and praised by government officials as a model for the entire industry, but the statistics and recognition weren't what mattered. Most to Jake, what mattered was Miguel, who had used his success at Haven Ranch to bring his entire extended family out of poverty. Miguel's younger sister was now attending college on a scholarship program that Henderson had established for employees' family members. What mattered was Maria, who had parlayed her position as head of food services into a catering business that served events throughout the region. Haven Ranch provided the commercial kitchen space and supported her entrepreneurial efforts. What mattered was Sarah, who had become a nationally recognized